Live streaming the meeting.
10 seconds. We're good to go.
Okay. Womanjika. This is a word in the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung language meaning welcome. I am the Mayor, Councillor Bruce Lancashire. I declare this meeting open at 7 p.m. I would like to welcome members of the public who have joined us in the chamber tonight. The purpose of a council meeting is to conduct the business of council in an orderly and constructive manner. Members of the public are not able to address council in the chamber. In the unlikely event of an emergency, please follow the direction of council officers and the emergency procedures on the wall near the door. I would like to note that I have given approval for Channel 31 to live stream this meeting. A recording of the meeting will be published on Council's website. Please stand for the acknowledgement of country. On behalf of Brimbank City Council, I respectfully acknowledge and recognise the Wurundjeri and Bunurong peoples as the traditional custodians of the land and pay respect to their elders past, present and future. Could councillors please remain standing? As the council, we will act in the best interests of the Brimbank community and consider the immediate and long-term impacts of our decisions. We will make these decisions fairly and without bias. We will uphold all of our obligations under the laws of Victoria and Council's local laws, and we will act in accordance with our code of conduct. Councillors, please be seated. Apologies and leave of absence. I note that Councillor Nguyen is on leave of absence. Councillor David has submitted a request for leave of absence for the period 27th of May 2023 to the 27th of June 2023. May I have a mover of a motion to grant the request? Councillor Rossi.
I move the motion to grant the request. Thank you.
Thank you. Seconder? Councillor Kerr.
I second the motion as per the business papers.
Would the mover like to speak to the
No,
motion?
thank you.
The seconder like to speak to the motion?
No, thank you.
Anyone else like to speak to the motion? I'll move the motion. All those in favour? Motion carried. Disclosure of conflicts of interest. Are there any declarations of conflict of interest? No. Designation of items as confidential. Would someone like to move the motion? Councillor Borg.
I'll move the motion as per business papers. Thank you.
Councillor Rossi.
I second the motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Borg, would you like to speak to the motion?
No, thank you. No, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Rossi, would you
No,
like to
thank
speak?
you.
Anyone else like to speak to the motion? All those in favour? Carried. Confirmation of minutes of previous meetings. May I have a mover of a motion to confirm the minutes of the previous council meetings? Councillor Tarkos.
I move the minutes as per previous business papers. Thank you.
Thank you. Seconder. Councillor Dang.
I second it. Thank you, Mayor.
Councillor Tarkos, would you like to speak to the motion? Councillor Dang, would you like to speak to the motion? Would anyone like to speak to the motion? All those in favour of the motion? Motion carried. Condolences. There are no items of condolences this evening. Congratulations. There are no items of congratulations this evening. Public question time. Ms Blatchford, I understand we have received questions from the members of the public.
Thank you, Mayor. We have received some questions this evening.
We have 4. The first question is from Shannon Miliak. Due to the requirement in the governance rules for questions to be as brief as possible, the preamble to the question will not be read out. Brimbank's 2022 to 2026 Disability Action Plan, or DAP, was released around 4 months ago, yet there is no reference to neurodivergent people other than reference to a symbol identifier, let alone any planning to ensure their inclusion in our community. Neurodivergent people should not need to wait until 2026 before their barriers to inclusion in Brimbank events will be considered. So what action is Brimbank City Council taking to ensure their inclusion is possible at council-run events?
Thank you. The recent establishment of the Disability Advisory Committee, who are also members of the community with lived experience of disability, including neurodiverse disability, carers and support services, will continue to provide voices to Council. They will oversee the monitoring and implementation of the actions, work to address any gaps and create new actions where necessary. All aim to demonstrate Council's commitment to people with disability, their families and carers. We are also working on a range of initiatives to ensure our events improve access to public spaces and facilitate inclusion in all council and community events, programs and activities. This work forms part of an implementation plan that sits alongside the DAP to guide the work of council and will be reported on annually.
Second question from Shannon Milak. As the pandemic continues, the immune compromised at risk or vulnerable and COVID cautious community have no choice but to continue to stay at home in isolation to ensure their safety and the safety of those in their care. This community is now more isolated than ever, particularly with online services and events progressively being discontinued, including by Brimbank City Council. Each time the issue has been raised with council departments and leaders, their continued response is that it's too difficult, too expensive, and that there is not enough interest to run online events. These excuses would be considered unconscionable if we were talking about wheelchair access, so why has Brimbank City Council decided that this community is not worth the funding or effort to ensure their inclusion, considering online events could also work to remove a barrier to access for neurodivergent people?
Thank you. As COVID restrictions eased, many community members of all abilities have been eagerly returning to the routine of attending regular in-person programming. The need to socialise and reconnect in person with other community members has been strong, with many people reporting that they have felt isolated during COVID. Nevertheless, Council continues to offer some online programs and events and many online services, recognising that not everyone can or wants to attend programs or access services in person.
Third question this evening is from Daryl Dorgan. Due to the requirement in the governance rules for questions to be as brief as possible, and because it is considered some of the question is disallowed by section 57.12.2 of the governance rules, I will edit this question. Emails that I've recently provided to the Mayor, as well as photographic evidence, details and shows the disgraceful level of workmanship that has been delivered by the contractors who constructed the Leslie Street Pocket Park. What action will now be taken to guarantee the contractors will be held to account?
Thank you. It is anticipated that this project will reach practical completion later this week. Following this, any defects will be resolved by the contractor over the next 12 months to Council's satisfaction. Council acknowledges your concerns. However, overall, this project has created a welcoming place for the local community to gather while supporting the business activity of the Leslie Street shopping strip.
Our final question for this evening is from Daryl Dorgan. I find it an insult to all ratepayers that a wall of recognition will be installed at the Bourke acknowledging councillors involved with the delivery of this project. How can councillors possibly think this is a good idea when I can't even get a concrete footpath installed in a park near my house that has been there for over 40 years?
Thank you. It is common across local, state and federal infrastructure to have an acknowledgement of decision makers who have led development of community facilities. If you wish to lodge a request about a footpath, you are welcome to contact customer service. Petitions. There is one petition to be received. Speed humps on Lake Boga Avenue, Deer Park and adjoining streets. Council received a petition with 24 signatories objecting to speed humps on Lake Boga Avenue, Deer Park and adjoining streets. May I have a mover of a motion to receive this petition? Councillor Borg.
I'll move the motion as per business papers.
A seconder for this motion. Councillor Kerr.
I second the motion as per the business papers.
Thank you. Councillor Borg, would you like to speak to this motion?
No, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Kerr, would you like to speak to this motion?
No, thank you.
Would anyone else like to speak to this motion? I'll move the motion. All those in favour? Adopted. Sorry, that one there. Minutes, reports of delegated committees. There are no minutes of delegated committees. Item 12, officer reports. There are 7 officer reports for consideration by Council tonight. We have a further 3 reports that we have designated as confidential items. If you have alternate or amended motions this evening, you must draft these motions and provide to the governance team via email so that they may be shared on screen and form part of the meeting. Otherwise, we may have to defer the matter until the motion has been written, allowing the meeting to proceed uninterrupted. Item 12.1, planning activity update and delegate decisions and planning scheme amendments update, February 2023. Mr. Walsh, do you have some comments?
I'm happy to introduce it. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The purpose of this report is for Council to be provided with information on the status of planning permit applications and trends in planning approvals in Brimbank, decisions made under delegated authority during February of 2023 this year, and the status of current planning scheme amendments as of the 28th of February of this year. Officers recommend that Council notes the planning activity update, the delegated decisions, and also the planning scheme amendment summary, all attached to attachment 1, 2 and 3. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. Do I have any questions for the Director? Do I have a mover of the report?
Move the report, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Papalia. Do I have a seconder of the report? Councillor Borg.
I'll second the report as per business papers. Thank you.
Okay. Do you have any? Are you speaking to the motion?
No, thank you, Councillor.
Do you want to speak to the motion, Councillor Borg?
No, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. Does anyone else want to speak to the report? All those in favour of the report? Thank you. Amendment passed. Motion passed. Item 12.2, Brimbank Council submission to the Aviation White Paper. Mr. Walsh.
Thank you again, Mr. Mayor. The purpose of this report is for Council to consider endorsing the officer's submission to the Aviation White Paper and providing a copy to the relevant federal and state government ministers and members of Parliament. Officers recommend that Council notes and endorses the submission at attachment 1, and as a result writes to a range of ministers and members of Parliament advising them of Council's decision. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. Is there any questions of the Director? Could I have a mover of the motion?
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to move the motion, thank you. As per business papers, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Tarkos. Seconder of the motion? Councillor Borg.
I'll second the motion as per business papers. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Tarkos, would you like to speak to the motion?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd just like to say, whilst the federal government's aviation white paper holds very positive goals, and that is to achieve net zero carbon emissions, address skills shortages, and how to revive the aviation sector post-pandemic, better mechanisms for consultation on issues like aircraft noise, airport development planning is definitely lacking. I hope the federal government looks at our submission and the fine print contained in this comprehensive piece of work. It would be really important that it focuses on the key issues, and that is the lack of transparency in its airport planning of the master plan, and in particular the proposed north-south third runway that will be decided very soon, which will impact Brimbank greatly. Contained in this submission is some very important points for the federal government to consider as stark inadequacies in its planning of airports. My main focus in this is the current noise measurement system is not up to scratch to protect the health and well-being of our communities. Ongoing monitoring of aircraft noise and aviation noise complaint system is completely inadequate. Most importantly, the ability for the community to present its concerns to an independent and expert third party for consideration and for public and independent recommendation needs to be made. I personally would like to hear from the Chief Health Officer, Brett Sutton, and the Head of the Education Department on what their view and evidence-based analysis is of the MDP third runway, and whether they believe an undertaking is needed by the airport to prepare a HIA, which is a health impact assessment, that would undergo an independent and expert peer review to ensure its veracity, and that it be made available for public viewing as part of the statutory consultation process. I support greatly and congratulate this council's submission. I urge the government to seriously review the weaknesses in transparency of process of health impacts, lack of independent review process, noise mitigation such as curfews, abatement and review of the ANEF contour systems. The 17 recommendations in this submission are vital considerations. Whilst we support and want a robust aviation industry, we still need to protect the health and lives of our children and vulnerable citizens under flight paths, schools, hospitals, places of worship, childcare centres and aged care centres. The federal government need to protect people who already have high vulnerabilities. I thank Kelvin, Leanne and his department's work for developing this strong submission to protect our people and provide a balanced approach to growth that lacks transparency and public scrutiny in. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Ball, would you like to speak to the motion?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. Briefly, I want to echo Councillor Taco's comments. The white paper will examine issues across the aviation sector in 4 specific areas. One of these areas is about better mechanisms for consultation on and management of issues like aircraft noise, airport development planning, and changing security requirements. Council submission, which is highly comprehensive, focused on this area. It identifies several failings in terms of airport planning, consultation and management, lack of transparency and inadequacies. Example, current noise management system to protect health and well-being, and the ability for community to express its concerns and so on. These are highly significant failings, especially considering the upcoming third runway and the adverse effects with regards to the noise impact that it will be having on our community at Brimbank. It's imperative that Council's recommendations be considered and implemented in the white paper. I would like to congratulate Director Kelvin and his staff for preparing such a great submission. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ball. Would anyone else like to speak to the motion? All those in favour of the motion? Motion carried. 12.3, Governance Report, March 2023. Ms Hill.
Thank you, Mayor. The Governance Report is a standing report within the Council meeting agenda. It is predominantly a summary of key operational and governance activity written in compliance with the Local Government Act 1989 and 2020. In this month's report, Council is recommended to note the attendance of councillors at the upcoming ALGA conference, endorse the draft terms of reference for the Safety and Wellbeing Partnerships and for the CEO Employee Matters Committee, and note and endorse 3 submissions relating to the EPA's draft guidelines for industry separation distances and land buffers, Melbourne Water's review into the Maribyrnong River flood event, and the submission to Heritage Victoria about permit application P370011 for works to HV Mackay Memorial Gardens. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Any questions for the Director? Do I have a mover of the motion?
I would like to move the motion that I've put up as per the shared screen.
Thank you. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Tarkos?
I second it as per shared screen. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions? In that case, Councillor O'Reilly, would you like to speak to the motion?
Yes, Mr Mayor. In relation to item 12.3.8 regarding the HV Mackay Gardens, the HV Mackay Memorial Gardens are of social, cultural and environmental significance to our community. The gardens are the earliest example of an industrial garden in Victoria. It is also the only garden in Brimbank that is heritage listed. The gardens were founded in 1909 for the HV Mackay workers who lived in the surrounding areas and enjoyed it along with their families and other local residents. The gardens have played an important role in the social history relating to manufacturing in Brimbank and in Australia. Today, the gardens remain as a key vestige of the early years of Sunshine. As a councillor for Harvester Ward, which encompasses the site of the HV Mackay Memorial Gardens, and as the holder of the sustainability portfolio for Brimbank, I have proposed the following amendment to include further information to Heritage Victoria in preserving and maintaining our gardens. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor O'Reilly. Councillor Tarkos, would you like to speak to the motion?
I support the additions made by the Councillor O'Reilly, and I'd like to speak to point F and E, Mr Mayor. The Melbourne Water review of Maribyrnong River flood event. I'd like to say that I did attend the session in Keilor Village to speak to the agencies that were primarily collecting information and submissions from residents and those impacted by the flood event. Along with what the submission says, I was quite disappointed with the lack of identification of Brimbank, in particular Keilor, where there were several households, farms and landowners impacted from inundation and received limited or late prior warning. Many were called 11 p.m. at night, which most people are asleep. And the next day we're finding the floodwaters reaching over their cars. I provided Melbourne Water with some images of the damage along the river, the riparian corridors, and just how quickly that water rose coming from the flooded creeks. What's considered the green wedge in many papers, where the river rose significantly and the ferocity destroyed the heritage Old Arundel Bridge as well. The wreckage it caused to landowners, losing pumps, crops, equipment, massive gum trees being uprooted and falling, and massive erosion of the riverbanks still remain as a testimony of the power of these floodwaters and the damage of this water hurtling towards Keilor and then beyond the village from Deep Creek. Photos are contained in this submission provided by Council just to show some of this damage. I expressed my disappointment to Melbourne Water for the debris still on the Brimbank Park River Trail, which remains still closed to public. People impacted by floods I spoke to said that they suffered trauma and shock, and so did their children, who are now frightened when it rains that it might flood again. A risk assessment must be conducted to flood-prone areas, including a package of support like counselling, insurance support, alternative accommodation. I would like to thank Tomarovsky's department and operations department for assisting those people that were affected. Many experienced losing their cars and some all of their contents with the rise of the river. I hope some meaningful measures come out of this, and our submission will support our community with that, so our community is not forgotten. The other submission is the draft separation distance for landfill buffers. This is particularly significant for Brimbank because we have a lot of landfills, both current and legacy sites. I have read through this complex and technical submission by Council to the EPA, and I surmise that the draft guidance shifts responsibility and costs back onto councils, which is generally beyond the technical expertise of council officers who deal with planning matters and responsible planning authority statutory powers. This is a resourcing issue, and as a general rule, when has council been also tasked to become technical experts that undertake risk assessments on landfills to consider buffer distances is putting the onus back on council when it should be on the EPA, providing the information and guidance. Shifting responsibility onto councils without supporting us with resources and technical expertise is, in my view, inefficient and akin to creating new risks. The EPA need to remain clearly accountable for their role as the peak body on all matters relating to amenity, human health, safety, and it is in their remit and responsibility to determine the separation distances of landfill buffers. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Tarkos. Would anyone else like to speak to this motion? Councillor Borg.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just to, in addition to what my fellow councillors refer to, the reports, I would also like to note the safety and well-being partnership terms of reference. This used to be called the safety round table. Great to see that well-being is now included with safety. Research shows that those who are a threat to community safety usually have mental health related problems and other health problems. This new partnership will maintain a safe and community inclusive as well as a support, as well as any support health and well-being initiatives. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Borg. Would anyone else like to speak to this motion? All those in favour? Motion carried. 12.4, Brimbank motions for the 2023 MAV and ALGA conferences. Ms Hill.
Thank you, Mayor. This report outlines recommended draft motions to be submitted to the Municipal Association of Victoria State Council meeting and the Australian Local Governance Association National General Assembly on behalf of Brimbank Council. These motions have been drafted in accordance with the requirements of both forums and are based on Brimbank's advocacy priorities. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Hill. Any questions for the Director? Would someone like to move this motion? Councillor Borg.
I'll move the motion as per business papers.
Thank you. Would someone like to second this motion? Councillor Russick.
I second the motion as per business papers. Thank you.
Councillor Borg, would you like to speak to the motion?
Just briefly, Mr. Mayor, altogether Council submitted 10 motions regarding various important topics, including but not limited to mental health and well-being, climate emergency, homelessness, and social affordable housing. One motion relates to reducing harm from electronic gaming machines. The pervasiveness and the adverse effects that gambling is having on our community have been highlighted many times in this chamber. This problem is getting worse. It's imperative that as a local government, we continue to take every opportunity to call on the state government to take the necessary steps to reduce losses and subsequent harms. Another motion relates to addressing underlying causes of crime and antisocial behavior. It calls for state government to support local government to adopt a localized approach to crime prevention. It also calls for the state government for more resources and funding for outreach services. The Algang motions, one of them refers to the compensation scheme for the airport's impact on the communities. Important that the General Assembly, that the National General Assembly to call on the federal government for such compensation. And another motion relates to the voice to Parliament. It's important that the National General Assembly acknowledge that the Australian government support of constitutional recognition of First Nations people. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Borg. Councillor Russick, would you like to speak to the motion?
No, thank you.
Would anyone else like to speak to the motion? All those in favour of the motion? Motion passed. Carried. Item 12.5, contract number 2028-24, pressure washing and cleaning to public toilets, barbecues and facilities, extension of contract. Mr. Romosky, would you like to speak to the motion?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. The purpose of this report is for Council to consider the extension of contract pressure washing and cleaning to public toilets, barbecues and facilities for a 2-year period. The current service provider has provided satisfactory level of service and there has been no contractual issues.
Councillor Papalia?
Yes.
Sorry, is there any questions for the Director on that? Okay. Councillor Papalia?
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to move 12.5, 12.6 and 12.7 as a block of contracts. Thank you.
Thank you. Before we go to that, could I have Ms Dumble speak to item 12.6? Oh, okay. Sorry. Yes. Ms Hill?
Thank you, Mayor. This report is being presented to councils to consider the extension of a schedule of rates in a contract with Procurement Australia for the supply and delivery of library collections, furniture, equipment and associated requirements. In this report, council is recommended to approve the extension. Thank you.
Thank you. Contract, excuse me, we would have no comment from the gallery, please. Contract number 19, Mr. Romosky, would you like to speak to that, please?
Thank you, Mayor. The purpose of this report is for Council to consider the extension of contract pavement marking services with Citywide Service Solutions for a 2-year period. The current service provider has provided a satisfactory level of service and there's been no contractual issues. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions in relation to either of those reports? Yeah, I've got a question. Excuse me, there's no questions from the gallery, thank you. What's that? We can move on. We've got to move on. Sorry, thank you. Yes, can we...
I move the motion as per business papers. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have a seconder for that report? Councillor David?
Second the motion, Mr Mayor.
Okay. Would you like to speak to that report?
No, thank you.
Councillor David, would you like to speak to that report? Thank you. Would anyone else like to speak to that report? Block movement. Excuse me, no comments from the gallery, please.
Excuse me, but you're just
Okay. Excuse me, but you are disrupting the meeting by your behaviour. If you continue to interrupt in this way, I will have no choice but to direct you to leave the meeting. Thank you. Now, okay.
Anybody else want to speak to this?
Anyone else wish to speak to this motion? Okay, all those in favour? Carried. Item 13, notice of motion. There are two notices of motion. Item 13.1, Brimbank Park maintenance and access. Councillor Tarkos.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. I move the motion as per shared screen. Thank you.
Do we have a seconder of that motion? Councillor Kerr.
I second the motion as per the shared screen.
Councillor Tarkos, would you like to speak to the motion?
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Yes, thank you. This motion is one of significant importance, and I feel like I'm bringing the voice of my community into this chamber tonight. This park is a very important and special state park to my community, and I feel like it's Groundhog Day when I do come and bring this issue up, but the complete neglect of this park really needs urgent action. So that's why I'm bringing this extensive notice of motion into the chamber. Council and community members have been raising concerns with the lack of maintenance of facilities at Brimbank Park, which include the toilets, rotunda, playgrounds, creating an unsafe amenity and resulting in reduced usage. Right now, there is no public transport available to go to Brimbank Park. Unless you have a car, you can't get there. If it's even slightly rained, all the fords are flooded, inhibiting access to people even living in the surrounding areas of Kealbus and Albans and Keilor. Council and community members have been raising concerns with the lack of response from the impact of last year's flood event, resulting in extensive amount of debris restricting access across sections of the Maribyrnong River Trail throughout Brimbank Park. This trail has been blocked off now for months. I have been raising it with Melbourne Water, Mr Mayor, but to date still remains closed. Council and community members have been raising serious issue of lack of access to Brimbank Park after rain events for many, many years. We have also been raising ongoing concerns when the fords are flooded. The only way to access Brimbank Park is by car. I have had reports of people trying to cross flooded fords where a grandparent, grandchild slipped on the rocks crossing from Kealba. That could have been a drowning. What does it take for Brimbank Park, for Parks Victoria, to be alerted to these access issues and to resolve them? Council and community members have been concerned about the lack of facilities, maintenance and access for over 10 years. Over 1,000 people previously signed a petition that this issue of access is addressed immediately, and safe access should be provided for people to visit their local park for mental and physical health. Council has been advocating to the state government and Parks Victoria for years, seeking improvements both to Brimbank Park and Orcam Pipes National Park. Both are significant assets within our community that were highly used during the pandemic, but people are continuously using them post-pandemic. Parks Victoria and Melbourne Water have previously advised that there is no funding available for construction of a pedestrian bridge over Maribyrnong River to provide safe access to Brimbank Park. We hear this, Mr Mayor, but we see all kinds of construction happening in neighbouring LGAs where they're getting pedestrian bridges, they're getting concrete drains turned into unique waterways, yet when it comes to Brimbank Park, there is never any money. Brimbank Council have previously written to the Ministers for D'Ambrosio to request an urgent response regarding the lack of safe pedestrian access over the Maribyrnong River to Brimbank Park, particularly after rains, to help prevent people and to ensure that people have safe access to parks that are by foot and by cycle close to them. The recent state government elections has transferred the responsibility to 3 ministers, the Honorary Ingrid Stitt, Honorary Melissa Horn and the Honorary Harriet Shing. Finally, I have submitted this notice of motion. I hope all my fellow councillors and colleagues can support it so that we can be in one voice to get things done and get this park management and maintenance moving. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Tarkos. Councillor Kerr, would you like to speak to the motion?
I just want to thank Councillor Tarkos for bringing this issue to light once again. As she described Groundhog Day, I feel like every 3 or 4 months we're bringing this matter to a head. I'm calling on the state government to stop the neglect of Brimbank Park and Parks Victoria. You know, Brimbank Park has a possibility of becoming a flagship park. There could be festivals held there and, you know, different community events, but it's basically sat stagnant for the last 25 years since I remember being a kid. Nothing has changed, nothing's been upgraded, there's accessibility issues. You know, we're calling on the state government to, you know, throw us a bone, give us something, at least fix the bridges so people have access to it. As Councillor Tarkos said, you need a car to get there. It's, you know, it's underutilised. It has the potential of becoming, you know, a great space for families, especially in the concrete jungle that we call Brimbank. So I hope that the state government can listen to our concerns. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kerr. Would anyone else like to speak to this motion?
Thank you,
Thank you,
Mr. Mayor.
Councillor
Yes, I
David.
would. I'd like to congratulate Councillor Tarkos for bringing this before us once again, because we had this quite a number of times, and so we should. The reason behind this, Mr. Mayor, it's one of the better open spaces we've got in Brimbank. It's an icon. And if people want to see really a history behind our indigenous people, they should go through the horseshoe site and walk the river, walk the bank. You see some history there, genuine history. It's on the rocks everywhere you go. Now, many times I have senior citizen groups and clubs which they go there to have lunch and some sort of an excursion, if you like. But they haven't got the facilities there, toilet facilities. And I believe Councillor Tarkos put there perhaps a little open playground, perhaps, where mothers, young mothers can take their children in the morning or perhaps late in the afternoon. There's nothing there. And we hammer and tongue for a long, long time, Mr. Mayor. Not just now, the last 2 terms. We had that before us. The Parks Victoria, they should come through and do something about that park. We had it before us a couple of times. They promised things and they never come. It's something that we need to have to speak to people or lobby some people to do something about it. And I think it's a wonderful thing that Councillor Tarkos brought it before us, and thank you for that. Thank you.
Thank you. Excuse me. No comments from the gallery, please. Would anyone else like to speak to this motion? All those in favour? Motion carried. Councillors, I would like to lodge a notice of motion at this meeting. I note that under section 2711 of the Brimbank governance rules, I must now vacate the chair and that the Deputy Mayor will now assume the chair for the duration of item 13.2. Thank you, Deputy Mayor. You are now the chair of this meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We're going to go to 13.2, requiring property owners to maintain their heritage buildings. Thank you, Councillor Lancashire.
Thank you, Acting Mayor. I move a report that receives a report for the following council meeting on requiring property owners to maintain their heritage buildings, as up on the screen. Thank you.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder for this motion? Thank you, Councillor David. Councillor Lancashire, would you like to speak to your motion?
Yes, I would. Thank you, Acting Mayor. In 2021, the state government introduced tough new laws into the Parliament to strengthen Victoria's building system and provide greater protection for heritage-listed places. The new provisions under the Planning and Environment Act 1987 were aimed at preventing developers from benefiting from the unlawful demolition or neglect of our precious built heritage. The changes to the Act allowed the government to regulate the development of land where a heritage building has been unlawfully demolished in whole or in part, or left to fall into disrepair. Neglecting a heritage building and allowing to fall into an irreversible state of repair has been a tactic used by unscrupulous developers to achieve demolition by stealth. These provisions represent a significant strengthening of the previous enforcement regime and were expected to act as a powerful deterrent to the unlawful demolition or demolition by neglect of buildings of heritage significance. These reforms completed the enforcement measures the government introduced in 2017, which made it an indictable offence for a builder or person managing building work to knowingly carry out works without a permit or in the contravention of the Building Act, the regulations or their permit. These changes were made following extensive consultation with the building industry and other stakeholders. Despite the Act being amended in 2021, its protection does not come into effect unless a provision for the protection of heritage buildings is included in the local planning scheme. It is now considered timely to consider including such a provision into the Brimbank planning scheme and provide protection for our heritage buildings against their demolition by neglect. The notice of motion calls for a report to come back to Council next Council meeting on requiring property owners to maintain their heritage buildings. I recommend this notice of motion to my fellow councillors. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lancashire. Councillor David, would you like to speak to this motion?
No, Madam Mayor, I haven't got any more to say. I think that the Mayor explained the whole situation there. I support it.
Thank you, Councillor David. Would anyone else like to speak to this motion? Or perhaps against? No? I'll put motion to vote. All in favour, please raise your hands. This motion carries. Thank you. I would now call Mr. Mayor to his chair to resume the meeting.
Item 14, notices of rescission. There are no notices of rescission. Item 15, urgent business. CEO, is there any urgent business?
No urgent business, Mayor.
Thank you. Item 16, confidential business. There are 3 items of confidential business. May I have a mover of a motion to close the meeting in accordance with section 66(2)(a) of the Local Government Act 2020 to members of the public for the consideration of items 16.1, 16.2 and 16.3, which have been designated confidential.
I move the motion to close the meeting for confidentiality.
Thank you. And a seconder?
I second that we close the meeting also. Thank you.
Would you like to speak to the motion?
No, thank you.
Like to speak to the motion? All those in favour of the motion? Thank you. This meeting is now closed. Now be closed to members of the public. We will reopen the meeting to the public after these items are considered by Council. The meeting is now closed to members of the public at 7:49 p.m. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, I'll just push on. I thank you again for your patience. I declare this meeting reopened at 8:01 p.m. Council has considered the confidential items and resolved that they will remain confidential at this stage. Thank you all for attending and for your interest in tonight's meeting. I declare this meeting closed at 7:02 p.m. 8:02 p.m. I instruct Channel 31 to stop live streaming this meeting. Thank you.